Hello and welcome to another episode of the Kid Stories Podcast. I'm Phil Bechtel. If you click the link in the show notes, you can see a simple writing video and see one way that we can create a story. In this video, I create a new ridiculous series. I think you'll like it. Check it out. Now let's get on to a shout out. Aiden Doyle is a big fan of the show. I think if you were a character in the stories, you'd be a wizard trapped in an orb by an evil dragon, and within the orb you create an entire new world with new dragons that help you break free from the orb and seek revenge on the dragon who did this to you. Thanks for listening, Aiden. Today's episode is titled The Dangers of Reading Again, Part 4. The kids all used the secret entrance and went into the Impenetrable Castle of the Mad Warlock Malachai. The place was dark and smelly and creepy. Even though the castle was relatively new, the brick walls were dark and wet and covered in moss. The long hallway quickly split off into many hallways, and countless doorways led to hundreds of rooms that linked then to even more windy hallways. The architect had clearly created a baffling maze, and the kids quickly realized that they would not be able to get through it without the map. "These rooms are nuts," whispered William as they walked past an open doorway. Inside the room was a green, floating orb, just hovering over the ground, and nothing else. "Yeah," agreed Dylan. "What is all this?" "Let's just assume everything here wants to get us and stick to the path," Calynn said. She held the map in front of her, using the flickering light of wall torches to follow the path that the architect had marked. Sometimes they had no choice but to face danger, and eventually they stood in a big hallway, staring into a room full of mud beasts. The beasts were all kneeling on the ground and hunched over. They appeared to be sleeping or hibernating or who knows what. Row after row of brown, wet mud creature, their arms tucked under their bodies gently rising up and down as they breathed. "They look almost peaceful," Calynn said. "Yeah, until they try and smash us," whispered Jameson. Calynn looked at the map again. "There's no way around," she said. "We have to go through there." And so they walked, slowly, silently through the room, passing so many beasts, trying desperately not to make a sound. They got about halfway across the room when one of their backpacks brushed up against one of the torches on the wall. The torch tipped out of its sconce and clattered to the ground. The group hoped that maybe the monsters wouldn't wake up, but the torch rolled to one of the monsters where it was on the ground, and the beast roared in pain. Who knew fire hurt mud? "Run!" Dylan yelled. The kids dashed for the door on the far side of the room, hoping they could reach it before the beasts awoke. But as the mud beasts slowly stood up, they grabbed at the kids, and there were too many to dodge. The kids ran back against a wall, and Calynn reached into her bag of power crystals. "Here, take one quick!" She tossed a power crystal to each of the boys. "What do they do?" asked Jameson, hoping he got fireballs. "I don't know, there's no time to—" Before Calynn could finish her sentence, a mud beast punched at her. She dodged just in time, and the muddy fist slammed into the brick wall behind her. The kids all scattered, trying to evade the monsters. It was frantic. They bounced around the room, and every time they dodged one mud beast hand, another tried to grab them from the other side. And they didn't know what their powers were, so they didn't know what to do right away, but they figured it out just in time. One mud beast grabbed William by the shirt, and as he tugged to get away, he came out of his body. Now there were two Williams, and one was struggling against a mud beast. Then another mud beast grabbed the other William, and he pulled away, and he came out of himself again, so now there were three Williams. Then William understood. "Infinite me!" he yelled, and more Williams emerged from the original and began fighting the beasts with his sword. One little kid wasn't much of a threat against these monsters, but 50 little kids with swords were quite the challenge. Jameson kept sticking his hand out toward the monsters with his hand open and his palm facing them, hoping fireballs would come shooting out. "Come on, fireballs, come on!" he grunted. But it didn't work. No fireballs. He glared at the monsters as they chased him around the room, and suddenly something amazing happened. 2 bright red beams of energy blasted forth from his eyes and cut through a group of the mud monsters. "Laser eyes!" Jameson yelled, and he continued to dodge and blast the beasts. Meanwhile, Dylan was cornered. His back against the brick wall, he looked for openings in the group of monsters that lumbered toward him, but there was none. He put up his hands and fought at the monsters as they reached down and grabbed his wrists and arms. He struggled, but it was no use. They were so much stronger, and there were so many of them. Dylan roared in frustration and scared himself. It was not the sound of a kid yelling. It was the sound of a monster. He yelled again, and a deep roar shot from his mouth. He felt his body changing. He was growing. He thrashed and kicked and punched, and the beasts dropped him to the ground, where he continued his transformation. A second later, and he was covered in thick black fur, and he stood as tall as the mud beasts. He looked at his hands, and he saw paws with huge claws on the end. He felt his face, and it became clear. He was a werewolf. Dylan roared again and leaped into the gang of mud monsters, slashing and kicking them to puddles. Calynn also found herself in a tight spot. A mud beast had her in a bear hug, and they were face to face. The monster squeezed too tight and walked her toward the door they had just come through, trying to take her who knows where. Calynn felt helpless. Her arms at her side, she wiggled back and forth to try and wiggle out of the beast's grasp. She screamed in frustration, and when she did, the monster holding her exploded from the impact of her super-powered sound waves. Calynn fell to the floor, completely covered in monster mud. She screamed again and turned her head as she did, the supersonic sound of her voice vibrating the monsters so much they exploded. And in spite of their incredible temporary powers from the power crystals, they were not going to defeat all the mud beasts in this room. It was a small army. Calynn could see Werewolf Dylan was beginning to tire, huffing and puffing, gasping for air. Jameson's hair was getting singed from his laser eyes, and there were so many Williams fighting that some were beginning to fade away. Calynn felt her throat begin to burn from her supersonic scream powers. She blasted her way across the room to the door. "Come on, follow me, we gotta go," she yelled to the others. They followed Calynn out into the hallway, and the mud beasts began to lumber after them. Calynn turned to the doorway and screamed at the ceiling above. The large bricks and stone trembled and shook and rumbled and began caving in. Jameson grabbed Calynn's backpack and pulled hard as the earth and bricks from the ceiling above caved in, nearly crushing her. As the dust settled, they saw a huge mound of bricks and earth where the doorway once was, blocking the path of the mud beasts. "Nice save," Calynn said to Jameson. "You too," he replied. They sat in the hallway for a few minutes, catching their breath and having a snack. "That was kind of awesome," said Dylan, now back to his original form of a human kid. "Yeah, that was awesome, but I did think I was going to get snatched up there for a minute," said Calynn. "Yeah, talk about a close call," said Jameson. "Let's see that map." Calynn laid the map on the cold stone floor of the dungeon, and they checked their path as they continued their journey to the Mad Warlock. The end. Thanks for listening, friends. If you go to kidstoriespodcast.com, you can sign up for the newsletter, where I email out coloring pages from the episodes and other cool stuff every so often. And you can send your drawings to kidstoriespodcast@gmail.com. Adios!